Welcome to Timeless Memories. I'm Sarah. This channel is a special place where we honor remarkable lives that continue to be remembered with love and admiration. Here, we reflect on unforgettable figures from film, music, television, and culture, celebrating their journey, their impact, and the legacy they left behind. Every tribute we share keeps their memory alive and forever meaningful. Phil Garner, known throughout baseball as, quote, scrap iron, was the kind of player whose reputation came from effort as much as talent. Born on April 30th, 1949, in Jefferson City, he grew up with a strong work ethic that carried through his entire baseball journey, eventually leading him to the University of Tennessee, where he developed into a reliable infielder with a steady bat and competitive edge. He made his Major League Baseball debut in 1973 with the Oakland Athletics and went on to build a long career spanning 16 seasons with several teams, most notably the Pittsburgh Pirates, where he played a key role in their 1979 World Series championship run. Known for his consistency and toughness, he appeared in over 1,800 games and earned 3 All-Star selections, becoming a dependable presence in every clubhouse he joined. After his playing days ended in 1988, he moved into managing, where he continued to shape the game from the dugout. As manager of the Houston Astros, he led the team to its first ever World Series appearance in 2005, marking a milestone in franchise history. Beyond statistics and results, Garner was respected for his leadership style, calm authority, and ability to bring out the best in players. His legacy in baseball remains tied to resilience, discipline, and a steady commitment to the game he dedicated his life to. 10 years ago this week, the music world reflects on the loss of Malik Taylor, known as Phife Dawg, a defining voice in hip-hop whose influence continues to resonate today. As a core member of A Tribe Called Quest, he helped shape a sound that blended jazz-inspired production with sharp, grounded storytelling, giving hip-hop a warmer and more reflective edge. Through landmark projects, such as The Low End Theory, his verses stood out for their humor, honesty, and everyday relatability, offering balance to the group's dynamic and helping redefine lyrical storytelling in rap music. Even years after his passing, his presence remains strong in modern hip-hop, with new listeners discovering his work and longtime fans continuing to celebrate his legacy. Phife Dawg is remembered not only for his technical skill and distinctive voice, but also for the authenticity he brought to his music, often speaking about everyday struggles, identity, and growth in a way that felt personal and relatable. His contributions helped broaden the emotional range of hip-hop and continue to inspire artists across generations. His legacy remains a reminder of how influence in music is often built through consistency, honesty, and a voice that speaks directly to lived experience. The television world is reflecting on the loss of Mel Schilling, who has died at the age of 53 after a battle with illness. For many viewers, she was far more than a dating expert on Married at First Sight. She was a calm, compassionate presence who helped people navigate some of the most emotional moments of their lives. Over more than a decade, Mel supported couples who took an extraordinary leap of faith, marrying a stranger and hoping to build a future together. Her guidance often went beyond advice, offering reassurance and perspective when things felt overwhelming. Off-camera, colleagues and participants remember her as someone genuinely kind, patient, and deeply attentive. She had a natural ability to make people feel comfortable, even during difficult conversations about love, trust, and vulnerability. Fans often describe her as a grounding force on screen, someone whose warmth could be felt through the television. Her legacy is carried not only in the show she helped shape, but in the many people who felt understood and supported because of her presence. She will be remembered for her empathy, professionalism, and the quiet strength she brought to every interaction and lasting impact on many lives. Mary Beth Hurt, The American actress, admired for her quiet intensity and emotional depth, has passed away at the age of 79. She is remembered for a career defined by subtle, expressive performances that often spoke louder in silence than in words. One of her most celebrated roles came in Interiors, where she starred alongside Diane Keaton in Woody Allen's early dramatic work, earning praise for her restrained yet deeply moving portrayal. Over the years, she continued to build a strong and respected body of work in films such as The World According to Garp, The Age of Innocence, and 6 Degrees of Separation, each role showcasing her ability to bring quiet emotional truth to complex characters. Rather than relying on dramatic gestures, she had a rare gift for realism, often grounding her performances in small details that felt deeply human and authentic. Her work reflected a thoughtful approach to acting, one that valued sensitivity, nuance, and honesty. Beyond her filmography, she leaves behind a legacy that continues to influence actors and filmmakers who admire understated performance styles. Her contributions to American cinema remain a lasting reminder of how powerful restraint and emotional clarity can be when brought together with genuine craft and dedication. 30 years ago this week, Hollywood quietly marked the passing of Greer Garson, who died at the age of 91, leaving behind a legacy that still feels remarkably alive to classic film lovers. She was one of the defining screen icons of the 1940s, an era when cinema carried both emotional weight and a sense of comfort for audiences navigating a world in turmoil. Garson's performances were known for their elegance, warmth, and quiet strength, qualities that quickly made her one of the most respected actresses of her time. Over the course of her career, she received 7 Academy Award nominations for Best Actress, a testament to her consistency and the depth she brought to every role. Her most celebrated performance came in 1943's Mrs. Miniver, where she portrayed a resilient British housewife during World War II. The role earned her an Oscar and remains one of the defining performances of wartime cinema. Even today, her films continue to resonate with viewers because of their sincerity and emotional clarity. Greer Garson's legacy endures not just in awards or records, but in the enduring sense of humanity she brought to the screen, inspiring generations who continue to discover her work. Mike Tyson stands as one of the most electrifying figures in sports history, a heavyweight champion whose presence felt like a force of nature rather than a mere athlete. Mike Tyson was not just known for winning fights, but for reshaping the emotional atmosphere of entire arenas before a single punch was thrown. The youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history, he became a symbol of unstoppable pressure, finishing elite opponents in moments that felt almost unreal. Yet his story was never only about dominance, it was also about a life shaped by instability, trauma, and an almost constant search for belonging. From the outside, he looked like inevitability in motion. Inside, he was still a boy, learning how to survive a world that rarely offered him safety. His rise, collapse, and rebuilding form a narrative that feels less like sport and more like a study of human extremes, where greatness and vulnerability exist in the same breath. This is the story of how a broken beginning became an unstoppable rise, and how that same force later turned inward, forcing a reckoning far more difficult than any opponent in the ring. A childhood built on absence and survival. Mike Tyson's early life in Brooklyn was defined by instability long before boxing entered the picture. Raised in Brownsville during the 1970s, he grew up in an environment marked by poverty, violence, and constant uncertainty. His father was absent, and his mother struggled to provide stability amid harsh living conditions. The streets became his first teacher, offering lessons in toughness that came without kindness or protection. As a child, he was frequently mocked for his appearance and speech, which deepened his sense of isolation. Hunger and neglect were ordinary parts of daily life, shaping a worldview where trust was rare and vulnerability often led to pain. In that environment, Tyson learned early that survival required emotional armor. The neighborhood itself reinforced that belief, where danger was never far and innocence had little room to exist. Even as a young boy, he carried the awareness that safety was temporary and that strength was not optional. These early experiences did not simply influence his personality, they formed the emotional foundation upon which everything else in his life would be built, including his later identity as a fighter, small cruelties, and the birth of defiance. As Tyson entered adolescence, his life in Brownsville intensified rather than softened. He became involved with older street groups, not out of ambition, but out of necessity for belonging. What began as small acts of survival slowly turned into repeated trouble with authority, with his name appearing in police records dozens of times before he reached his teenage years. One of the most defining emotional moments of his childhood involved pigeons he cared for on rooftops, where he briefly experienced peace and control. When one of those birds was killed by another boy, Tyson described feeling something inside him shift permanently. That moment hardened his emotional stance toward the world, reinforcing the belief that loss was sudden and protection was unreliable. His response was not immediate violence alone, but a deeper psychological turning inward, where anger became structure and discipline began forming around emotional pain. The streets no longer just shaped his behavior, they shaped his identity. Every confrontation, every humiliation, and every act of survival contributed to a growing sense that power was the only way to prevent erasure, a turning point behind institutional walls. Tyson's trajectory changed when repeated delinquency led him to a reform school in upstate New York. The environment was strict, isolating, and emotionally cold, designed more for control than guidance. It was there that he met Bobby Stewart, a counselor and former boxer who recognized Tyson's raw physical talent during a chance observation. Stewart introduced him to structured training and later connected him with Cus D'Amato, the legendary boxing trainer who would redefine Tyson's future. In D'Amato's presence, Tyson encountered something unfamiliar, focused attention and belief from an adult who saw potential instead of just problems. D'Amato offered not only training but a sense of direction and emotional grounding that Tyson had never experienced. For the first time, discipline was not punishment but purpose. This transition marked a psychological shift, where aggression was redirected into technique and survival instincts were refined into controlled power. The path ahead was no longer dictated solely by the streets, but by a structured vision of what he could become inside the ring. Forging the fighter in Catskill discipline training under Cus D'Amato in Catskill, New York, transformed Tyson's raw energy into one of the most feared fighting styles in boxing history. The regimen was intense, repetitive, and mentally demanding, designed to strip away hesitation and build instinctive precision. Tyson trained in isolation, running before dawn, drilling combinations endlessly, and studying defensive movement until it became automatic. D'Amato's psychological approach was just as important as the physical training, teaching Tyson to channel fear rather than eliminate it. He was introduced to the peekaboo style, which emphasized head movement, explosive counterattacks, and constant forward pressure. This system suited Tyson perfectly, turning his aggression into calculated destruction. Yet beneath the structure remained emotional weight, especially after the loss of his mother during his teenage years, which deepened his sense of isolation even within success. D'Amato became a father figure, offering guidance and stability that anchored Tyson during his most formative years. In this environment, Tyson was not simply learning how to fight, he was being rebuilt from the inside out, shaped into a version of himself that could dominate physically while still carrying unresolved emotional fractures. The meteoric rise to heavyweight champion Tyson's professional debut in 1985 marked the beginning of one of the fastest ascents in boxing history. He won fight after fight with overwhelming speed, often ending matches in the opening rounds. Opponents struggled to adapt to his relentless pressure and explosive combinations. Within a year, he was already considered a future champion, drawing massive attention and rapidly growing financial success. His style combined aggression, defensive movement, and psychological intimidation, making him nearly impossible to prepare for. In 1986, he became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, defeating Trevor Berbick in a decisive victory that stunned the boxing world. From that point, his dominance accelerated. He unified titles, defeated top contenders, and built a reputation for finishing fights with devastating efficiency. The most iconic moment came against Michael Spinks, where Tyson ended the fight in just 91 seconds, solidifying his status as an unstoppable force. At this peak, he was not just winning, he was redefining what dominance in boxing looked like, turning every fight into a global event that felt predetermined in his favor. The peak of power and the first signs of distance. At the height of his career, Tyson's presence inside the ring felt almost mythic. Opponents entered fights already psychologically overwhelmed, often defeated before the first punch was thrown. However, behind this dominance, subtle fractures were beginning to form. The loss of Cus D'Amato earlier in his career left a deep emotional gap that could not be replaced. Without his mentor's guidance, Tyson gradually lost the stabilizing influence that had shaped his discipline. Management changes and external pressures introduced instability into his environment. Fame brought constant attention, wealth, and influence, but also reduced privacy and emotional grounding. Training habits began to shift, and distractions increased. While victories continued, certain fights revealed vulnerabilities that had not been visible before. The structure that once held his life together was slowly eroding, even as his public image remained invincible. This period marked a transition where success and instability coexisted, creating tension beneath the surface of continued triumph. The world still saw a champion at his peak, but internally, the foundation was beginning to weaken in ways that would later become impossible to ignore. Collapse in Tokyo and the shock of defeat. The fight against Buster Douglas in 1990 marked one of the most dramatic upsets in sports history. Tyson entered the match as an overwhelming favorite, but his preparation and focus were no longer at the level of his earlier career. Douglas fought with unexpected resilience, surviving punishment, and gradually gaining control of the fight. In the 10th round, Tyson was knocked down and failed to recover in time, losing his undefeated status in a moment that stunned the world. The defeat revealed more than a single poor performance. It exposed underlying issues of discipline, motivation, and emotional fatigue. For Tyson, the loss was deeply personal, representing not just a broken record, but a disruption of identity. The aura of invincibility that had defined him was suddenly gone. This moment marked a turning point, where the difference between raw talent and sustained structure became undeniable. The boxing world began to see that even the most dominant force in the sport could be vulnerable when internal stability weakened. Prison years and forced reflection. In 1992, Tyson was convicted and sentenced to prison, marking a complete interruption of his boxing career and public life. The transition from global fame to confinement was psychologically intense. Inside prison, external distractions disappeared, leaving only reflection and internal confrontation. He faced the consequences of past actions and the instability that had surrounded his rise. Training in limited conditions replaced professional environments, and reading and introspection became part of his routine. This period forced Tyson to confront aspects of himself that fame had previously masked, including anger, impulsivity, and emotional fragmentation. While difficult, the experience also introduced a level of self-awareness that had been absent during his peak years. It was not a redemption arc in the traditional sense, but a pause that forced re-evaluation. Prison stripped away the external identity of, quote, champion, leaving only the individual behind it, struggling to understand what remained once success was removed. Return to boxing and the weight of expectations. After his release, Tyson returned to boxing with significant public attention and commercial interest. Early victories suggested a comeback, but the environment around him had changed. The discipline and structure that once defined his training were no longer consistent, and external pressures continued to grow. Although he regained titles, the emotional clarity of his earlier career was no longer present. Fights became more fragmented, and performances varied. The rematch with Evander Holyfield became one of the most controversial moments of his career, resulting in severe consequences and global criticism. This period highlighted the difference between physical capability and emotional control. Tyson remained powerful, but the balance that once guided his dominance had weakened. The return phase of his career was defined less by unstoppable rise and more by attempts to stabilize a legacy that had already reached its peak. Financial collapse and personal unraveling. Despite earning hundreds of millions of dollars throughout his career, Tyson eventually faced financial collapse. Poor management, excessive spending, and lack of financial oversight contributed to bankruptcy filings in the early 2000s. His lifestyle during peak wealth included luxury assets, large entourages, and constant expenditure that outpaced sustainability. As financial pressure increased, personal struggles also intensified. Public image declined, and career opportunities shifted away from championship dominance toward exhibition and commentary. This phase represented a stark contrast to his earlier life of control inside the ring. The man once feared globally now faced instability in everyday existence. The collapse was not only financial but symbolic, representing the fragility of success without structure. It reinforced the reality that athletic dominance does not guarantee long-term stability outside competition. Rebuilding identity beyond the ring. In later years, Tyson began a process of rebuilding his life outside boxing. He shifted focus towards self-reflection, storytelling, and public honesty about his past experiences. Conversations about mental health, addiction, and personal growth became central to his public presence. He explored new ventures, including entertainment and media, while also stepping away from competitive fighting. This period was defined by acceptance rather than dominance. Tyson acknowledged both his achievements and his failures, presenting a more complete version of his story. The intensity that once defined him in the ring transformed into introspection and communication. Rather than being remembered only as a destroyer in boxing, he began to be seen as a complex figure, shaped by both greatness and struggle. His later life reflects a shift from external conquest to internal understanding, showing that transformation is possible even after extreme rise and fall.